La Traviata by Giuseppe Verdi. It is hard to say, isn't it, why that music sounds so intensely nostalgic. Listening to those opening bars of the prelude to Verdi's La Traviata, we have an irresistible sense of a sort of musical déjà vu, as if we have been there, and it is our life that is being recalled. It is for this reason that many stage directors have chosen to stage the prelude. Instead of leaving the curtain decently down, they show Violetta on her deathbed, recalling in her mind the events of the opera we are about to encounter. We'll return in a moment to speculate on why that music bears the mark of authentic memory, but in the meantime, let's reflect a little on the young composer who created with this, his 18th opera, a scandal and a masterpiece. Verdi was born in 1813, and most of his early operas were based on biblical or distant historical subjects, as most operas were in those days. He spent his young manhood in what was in effect an occupied country. Austrian domination of northern Italy was a fact of his young life, and like most occupying forces, the Austrians practiced stern political censorship. So, for that matter, did the Papal States that controlled central Italy. So, mythological subjects and stories of long ago were a safer bet in a paranoid and censor-ridden society. But La Traviata would run into another form of censorship: moral censorship. Nowadays, when we live in an age when attending opera is about as respectable a way as you'll find to pass an evening, it is hard for us to understand just how shocked our ancestors could be by the latest opera. The play and the film Amadeus reminded us of just how revolutionary, subversive even, The Marriage of Figaro appeared in its day. No assessment of the initial impact of Bizet's Carmen can fail to note that the heroine was a member of a despised minority. Carmen is a gypsy, hardly a suitable person to be an operatic heroine. But worse still, the heroine of La Traviata is a prostitute. La Traviata, the woman who went astray, is the slightly comical, literal translation. Call her what you will, audiences of Verdi's day, and for long after, were appalled that the maestro should choose such a character as his heroine. So it came to pass that the premiere was given not as Verdi had intended in modern dress, but in the ruffles and frills of an imaginary England of the time of Charles I. Amazingly, this tradition continued in whole or in part well through the 19th century, so that George Bernard Shaw, who in addition to being a playwright was also a music critic, could write in 1890 of Violetta in the latest Paris confections and Alfredo in full Louis XIV fig. Despite its moral problems, or maybe as a result of them, the role of Violetta is beloved of sopranos. It offers the most marvellous musical and dramatic opportunities to a singer-actress with what Verdi called the looks, soul, and good stage presence to command the role. The singer is given some of Verdi's greatest melodies. The role has its flashy moments, its moments of high drama, moments of great poignancy, and a very protracted death scene. Sentimental? Yes, but what is life without a bit of sentimentality? Perhaps the reason the music sounds so intensely nostalgic is because it is a true story, or at least based on a real incident involving three principal characters who really did live in 19th century Paris, where the opera is set. These three characters are Violetta, the heroine, Alfredo, the tenor and her lover, and Germain, père, Germain, the father, baritone and father of Alfredo. Now, of course, we'll use their operatic names throughout, Violetta, Alfredo, and Germain. But Violetta's real name was Alphonsine Duplessis, and she was in real life a courtesan, then, as now, a popular profession in Paris. It was also one which enjoyed high status in the so-called demi-monde, half-world, of Paris, the City of Light. Tenor and baritone, son and father, are even more interesting historically. The son, called in the opera Alfredo, was in real life Alexandre Dumas' fils, or junior, as we might say nowadays, the author of The Lady of the Camellias. The father, always referred to in the opera as Germain père, was Alexandre Dumas, the novelist who wrote The Count of Monte Cristo, The Man in the Iron Mask, and much else. There is, in a sense, a kind of unsavoury kiss-and-tell aspect to this work. Alexandre Dumas Jr., hereinafter, as the lawyers say, referred to as Alfredo, did indeed have an affair with the courtesan Alphonsine Duplessis. She did, in truth, succumb to the then prevalent disease of consumption. From their affair and her misfortune, the young man fashioned a wildly successful novel called La Dame aux Camélias, The Lady of the Camellias. This was to prove to be one of the most durable and adaptable of literary properties. It has been a successful novel, a long-running play, a famous film starring Greta Garbo in one of her legendary roles, and a ballet, Sir Frederick Ashton's Marguerite et Armand, famously created for Margot Fonteyn and the young Rudolf Nureyev. But it is as an opera, Verdi's La Traviata, that the love affair lives on and is expected to survive well into the 21st century, because Verdi, with his usual dramatic flair, extracted the main incidents of the affair and wrapped them in some of his most sensual and moving music. The composer was in his 40s and at the height of his phenomenal powers. This opera, along with Rigoletto and Il Trovatore, represent a sort of melodic high noon for Italian opera. For many people, these three works, Rigoletto, La Traviata, and Il Trovatore, virtually define all that is best in Italian opera. Why? Because in addition to having splendid blood and thunder plots, and in addition to providing great roles for gifted singers, they contain some of the most thrilling music ever written, in any genre. The phrase high noon might apply just as well to their place in Verdi's career. His early years he himself described as his galley slave years, when he was turning out one opera each year for the apparently insatiable Italian opera market. By the time of these three great works, the 1850s, Verdi had enough status and financial security to choose his own subjects, where his operas would be performed, and who would sing them. You might say that this great middle period, as it is always called, of Verdi's career, culminated in the stupendous success of his Aida. After Aida, the world heard no more from the maestro for many years, and assumed that he was imitating Rossini's example and taking early retirement. But no. In his 70s, he startled the opera world by returning with the greatest of all Italian dramatic operas, Otello. And in his 80s, dumbfounded it by writing the greatest Italian comic opera, Falstaff. But these two great works lay many years in the future when La Traviata had its premiere at the lovely La Fenice Theatre in Venice. The opera opens at a party. Young Alfredo, a guest at the party in the palatial Paris home of the courtesan Violetta, is asked to oblige the company with a drinking song, and he responds with perhaps the best-known drinking song in all opera, called Libiamo. Drinking songs were, as you probably know, fairly stock items in operas of the period, but, as so often with Verdi, the traditional form is given an extra spin. Because, in addition to being a wonderful song in its own right, this number succeeds in delineating the light-hearted qualities of Alfredo, while setting the tone of mindless gaiety of the Paris of the mid-1850s. A convention, in other words, is transformed into a dramatic device. And when Violetta takes up the tune, we have a further dramatic device, the means by which the two young people make first contact. Next, we have a wonderful incident, which also serves a purpose in the delineation of character, which was such a strong characteristic of Verdi, at a time when operatic characters too often were two-dimensional singing machines. We are able to hear in this next duet the difference between the ardent and idealistic young Alfredo with the more worldly Violetta. It is an enchanting duet, and begins with the words un dì felice, one happy day, You came into my life, and since then I have lived in an ecstasy of love. The boy is clearly a poet. Then he launches into one of the opera's most exquisite melodies, and one of its most important themes, because it is a tune which will return to haunt Violetta as it haunts us. He sings of the nature of love. Misterioso, croce e delizia nel cor. Mysterious, both a cross and delight to the heart.
L'universo intero, misterioso, misterioso altero, croce delizia, delizia al cor.
To counter this ardency, Violetta offers light-hearted dismissal. All she can offer is friendship. So if it is true love he wants, he must look elsewhere. And these two attitudes, so skillfully presented in their respective music, provide the material for the rest of their duet. Alfredo leaves the party, but before he goes, Violetta gives him one of her eponymous camellias, and tells him he may return again when its colour has faded. All the party guests leave, and Verdi marvellously captures the mindless chatter and gaiety as the guests thank Violetta, grab their coats and hats, and totter out into the dawn light. In addition to being exhilarating musical theatre, the busy chatter of the chorus sets us up splendidly for Violetta's first and introspective big scene. Let's hear the chorus depart. Violetta is left alone on stage, and she has an immensely long scene, which, in accordance with hallowed operatic tradition, is in 3 parts. In many earlier operas, including some of Verdi's, this would have been the entrance aria, the character's calling card, in which she tells who she is, who she's misguidedly in love with, and why they need to write an opera about her. Here, Violetta's purpose is subtler and finer than that, because we shall know more about the character and her motivations by the time it is over. The 3 parts of the scena, or scene, are recitative, aria, and cabaletta. They remain a trademark of Verdi, and this is one of the finest. The recitative is deliberately not of melodic interest, more like dialogue set to music, and usually tells us something factual. To show how skillfully Verdi is able to segue from the public gaiety to the private mind of Violetta, let us just hear again the closing bars of the preceding chorus, and then Violetta's reflective "Estrano, estrano." It is strange. In this recitative, she muses on the fact that she has never truly loved any man, and wonders whether true love is indeed an option for her. And this is followed by the aria proper. Ah, forse è lui. Perhaps he is the man I dream of, the man who is everything I long for. It is one of Verdi's loveliest melodies, and requires a soprano with a pure and lovely tone, capable of breathlessly floating an exquisite tune. Now, interestingly, halfway through the aria, or middle section of the scena, she recalls that tune we heard earlier, first from the lips of Alfredo, during their short duet, A quell'amor. His music has become hers. His sentiments, by inference, hers. That's what music drama is meant to be about. There now follows a sort of bridge passage between the aria and the fast section called the cabaletta, in which she sings that this is all nonsense, that true love is not an option for someone in her profession. And then she launches into a superb cabaletta which encapsulates one aspect of Violetta, her free spirit. The word cabaletta is interesting in itself. It comes from the same root as cavalry, from the vulgar Latin for a horse, caballo, and is so called because the insistent rhythm of the orchestra, under the voice, more often than not recalls the sound of galloping horses. At this point, Violetta will usually, depending on the size of the opera company's props budget, take her champagne glass, or in a wealthy company maybe the whole bottle, and toss it into the fireplace before singing Sempre libera, always free. I am a free spirit, and need to be alone in this populated desert, Popoloso Deserto, which is Paris. I suggest you simply listen to the musical verve of the cabaletta and the extraordinary vocal demands Verdi makes of the soprano at the end of a tiring act. But note also the device of having Alfredo sing off stage to point the way to true love. His interjections throw her vocal fireworks into high relief.
Di gioia in gioia, o che
So, with a triumphant return of the Sempre Libera theme, Violetta appears to reject the notion of true love and swears to remain a free spirit, dancing, drinking, and presumably working the night away. One thing worth remembering about operatic sopranos is that once they have made up their minds to do something and have expressed it so forcibly, nothing whatever will make them stick to it. We have just heard Violetta sing at some length of her need and desire to remain in Paris and continue what we are obliged to call her career. So it will come as little surprise to learn, as the curtain rises on the second act, that she and Alfredo have been living these intervening 3 months in a love nest in the country, pursuing something just short of marital bliss. We discover Alfredo, who has a lovely aria in 2 parts, and will enjoy the unusual pleasure here of hearing both parts. In the first part, the aria proper, he sings «Dei miei bolenti spiriti», telling how his formerly ebullient spirits, bolenti spiriti, have been calmed by rustic domesticity.
Dei miei volenti spiriti, il giovanile ardore, e la temprò col placinoso riso dell'amor.
But not for long. As you and I know, but Alfredo apparently doesn't, rustic domesticity comes with a price tag, and he learns from Violetta's maid that the lady has been selling her horses, her carriage, and her jewellery to pay the bills. In many productions, the tenor exits sharply upon hearing this news, partly out of shame and remorse, but mainly to avoid having to sing the cabaletta, which is another form of croce and delizia, a cross for the tenor, and a delight to us. If you miss the connection between orchestras and galloping horses in Violetta's cabaletta, you won't in the thundering accompaniment to Alfredo's cry of remorse and shame, "O mio rimorso, o infamia."
O mio rimorso infamia, io visitar l'errore, ma è torpe solo frangere, il bene mi valerò. Per poco in seno acquetati, grido dell'onore, ma avrai se colma d'indice quest'onda l'amerò. O mio rosor, o infamia, sì quest'onda l'amerò, sì l'amerò. O mio rosor, o infamia, sì quest'onda quest'onda
The next major scene is in every way the emotional and dramatic turning point of the piece, so it is a pity in a way that it taxes our millennial credulity. But if you can accept the social conventions of that time, all is understood. It seems that Alfredo has a sister who is engaged to a young man of good family. However, the good family will not permit their son to marry into one where the son and heir is cohabiting with a known prostitute. So Germain Pére's delicate mission is to persuade Violetta, for the good of Alfredo's family, to give up Alfredo, even if it means losing her last chance of happiness. Things get off to a sticky start, but here again, Verdi, in a swift penstroke, gives us a fascinating insight into Violetta's character. Germain arrives in blustery baritone style, demanding her attention, and she replies, "Donna son io, ed in mia casa. I am a lady, and this is my house." The lady is not for spurning.
Madamicella Valari, son io. D'Alfredo il padre in me vedete? Sì, dell'incauto che a ruina corre, ammaliato da voi. Son io, signori, ed in mia casa.
Germain recovers the initiative with a marvellous aria in which he tells Violetta that he has 2 children and that the daughter is pura siccome un angelo, pure as an angel.
Pura siccome un angelo, Dio mi die una figlia, se Alfredo negarieno io sero alla famiglia, l'amato amante giovine, cui sposo andar dovea, or si ricusa e vincolo che lieti ne rendeva.
Violetta, we must accept, is the proverbial whore with the heart of gold, and this ravishing melody goes a long way towards melting the said heart. Her further protestations are somewhat tactlessly negated by Germain pointing out that her charms will in time fade, and that Alfredo is a young man with his whole future in front of him.
Pensate per voi non avran mai pesano, e più soavia fede, quel che dal cielo furono dai voli benedetti.
Eventually and reluctantly, she agrees, though she knows it will destroy her, break Alfredo's heart, and dash her last best hope of true love and happiness. The vehicle of her submission is the lovely aria Dita alla giovane. Tell the young girl that there once was a poor soul who sacrificed all for the young girl's happiness. This exquisite melody, which calls for superb emotional and vocal control on the part of the soprano, is another factor in making this a beloved role. We'll hear another in a moment. Piangi, piangi, weep, weep, says Germont, recognizing the sacrifice he is asking, and again you would note the masterful way in which the male character, in this case Germont, punctuates and points up the emotion of the moment with his interjections. Germont leaves, and there is a short scene now as Violetta sits to write a letter of farewell to Alfredo. She is interrupted by his return, and she takes an emotional farewell, pleading, in vain as it happens, for his continuing love and understanding. You will recall the haunting tune we heard first in the prelude. Well, that tune returns now in full force in another of those moments which show the emotional and vocal range of Violetta. As she takes her leave from him, she pours out from an anguished heart, "Amami, Alfredo. Love me, Alfredo, as I have loved you." This is really grand opera at its grandest. That scurrying string phrase you just heard marks the departure of Violetta, and when Alfredo is given a note telling him that she has left him for Paris, he is distraught. One of the great techniques of this act, and one of which Verdi was such a master, is the juxtaposition of moments of high drama with periods of calm and lyric beauty. So Alfredo's rage at the perceived betrayal is met by his father's return and his attempt at consolation. The father, whom we first met barking and snapping at Violetta, is now all tender paternal concern, as he reminds his son of the peace of their home in Provence, and urges him to return to the sea and sun of their native Provence. The aria is called Di Provenza il mare il sol. But to no avail. Alfredo has seen a letter from Flora, Violetta's old chum from Paris days, inviting her to a party, and assumes that Violetta has returned to her old ways, and heads off to Paris to take his revenge. Again, Verdi's masterly ability to switch atmospheres. From the rustic simplicity of Act 2, Scene 1, he plunges us with that fiery music back into the glitter of the Paris demi-monde. This is a party at the home of Flora, a friend and colleague of Violetta, and the scene provides opportunity, mandatory in those days, for ballet and spectacle. Among the diversions are a Spanish dance, which begins with the ladies of the chorus singing Noi siamo zingarelle, we are gypsies. Much swaying of hips and clashing of castanets, tambourines, and other hardware are traditional at this point in the opera. The ballet usually takes over now, to the relief of the assembled, with a more athletic dance in the Spanish style, which might be described as a tarantella. It often takes the form of a mock bullfight. But we need to skip over much to reach the main incident of the scene, which is one of the most powerful, even chilling, in all Verdi's massive output. It occurs in the following way. Alfredo has come to the party and has been drinking and playing cards. He wins massively, perhaps as a reflection of the old dictum, lucky in cards, unlucky in love. Violetta arrives at the ball on the arm of her former protector and client, Baron Duffol, which further enrages Alfredo. To the audible horror of the crowd, he throws his winnings at her feet with the words, Qui testimon viciamo, I call on you all to witness that I have paid my debt to her in full. Let's hear that terrible incident and the crowd's horrified reaction.
Sperdea, io cieco, vile, misero, quace malvatea, e va in tempo ancora teggermi, dato il temacchio bravo, qui testimoni, vitiamo, or testimoni vichiamo, or testimoni vichiamo, e qui pagata io
Jean mon père enters at this very moment and disowns his son for his disgraceful treatment of Violetta, without, incidentally, accepting the blame for the whole mess. But it is Violetta's reaction that triggers one of those great architectonic finales which are such a wonderful feature of the mature Verdi. There is a less good one in Don Carlo, and the greatest of all in Otello, when the Moor publicly insults his wife Desdemona. But this is the prototype. It begins with Violetta in stricken tones telling Alfredo that he can never understand the depth of her love. Each of the characters comments on the situation, but it is the anguished tones of Violetta soaring over the dense ensemble that is seared into the mind. This is a long extract, but it must be heard at length to grasp Verdi's mastery of the form and his ability to sustain emotion over the great arch of such a finale.
scinde senza ordine, lei per me.
Some months pass between the second and third acts. Alfredo has fought a duel with the Baron and has gone abroad. Violetta, her health failing, is alone and deserted by all but her maid Annina and her faithful doctor. No successful film, the great art form of the late 20th century, could succeed without the mandatory sex scene. No opera, the great art form of the 19th century, could succeed without the protracted death scene, and Violetta's death will occupy us for the whole of the short but intense third act. Listen how Verdi uses material with which we are already familiar to depict the bleakness of Paris in midwinter, and, by inference, the bleakness of Violetta's fate as she lies dying alone in that populated desert which is Paris. A device which both Verdi and Puccini used to heighten emotion in their final death scenes, Verdi here, Puccini in La Bohème, is the use of the spoken word, which in an opera, where singing is the normal means of expression, can carry a special resonance. Listen as Violetta, to the accompaniment of a solo violin, reads a letter she has received from Mon Père, saying that Alfredo and the Baron have fought a duel, that Alfredo is abroad, but will return to her soon.
Teneste la promessa. La disfida ebbe luogo. Il barone fu ferito, però migliora. Alfredo è in stranio suolo. Il vostro sacrificio io stesso gli ho svelato. Egli a voi tornerà per il suo perdono. Io purverò. Curatevi. Meritate un avvenir migliore. Giorgio Germont.
In truth, Alfredo, or Alexandre Dumas fils, whom he was in reality, never did make it back to Paris in time to see Alphonsine Duplessis before she died. But dramatic necessity demands a reunion. There is a scurrying of orchestral strings, and the faithful Annina, the maid, enters to herald Alfredo's arrival, and an exchange of impassioned phrases marks the start of the lovers' final, brief encounter.
Signora, che t'accadde? Questo c'è, è vero? E sentite meglio? Sì. E che? D'esser calmo promettete? Sì. Che vuoi dirmi? Prevenirvi vogli una gioia improvvisa. Una gioia? Dicesti? Sì, o signora. Alfredo, a te vedesti? E vien, affretta, Alfredo!
Oh mia Violetta, oh mia Violetta, oh mia Violetta, oh gioia! Colpevol son tutto caro.
Io so che fine, risa mi sei.
Da questo palpito sciutamo in pala, senza te esistere più non potrei.
A sangue in vita m'è ritrovato, credi continuerei, voglio.
Scorda l'affanno d'una donata, me perdoni al genitore.
Chi ti perdoni, la ria so io, ma sono morto e mi rende.
Non l'uomo demon angel mio, mai più dividermi potrà da te.
Non l'uomo demon angel mio, mai più dividermi.
Mai più no, mai più no, e
They have a short and deeply affecting little duet now as they plan their future together. Here is Alfredo's verse, in which he sings, "You'll leave Paris and go back into the countryside, where you will bloom again."
Parigi, cara, noi lasceremo la vita uniti, trascorreremo decorsi affanni, compenso avrai la tua salute, riviolina. Sospiro e luce, tu mi sarai, tutto il futuro ne arriverà.
A great creative artist like Verdi knows that unrelenting gloom and mourning do not great theatre make. So this protracted death scene is enlivened, if that's the right word, by occasional moments of high drama. Here is the most exciting, as Violetta summons her remaining strength for a great cry of "Grandio morir si giovane," an impassioned protest at having to die so young.
Dunque
Soon Jean Mon Père arrives and secures her forgiveness for all the anguish he has caused. And since Violetta is the very model of a whore with the heart of gold, it is appropriate that her last instruction to Alfredo should be to marry some simple, pure girl in the first flush of life. It is a slightly mawkish sentiment, and again the soprano's remarks are punctuated and heightened by the men in what remains of her life. The sentiment, however, is elevated to great art by one of Verdi's simplest and most exquisite rising melodies. Notice how the juddering chords in the orchestra herald the imminent approach of death. It is an oddly touching aspect of opera that our heroines are often at their most tragic and affecting, not when they are suffering, but when they are happy. Butterfly's joy when she thinks Pinkerton will indeed return to her is a good example. Here, in a condition which we are told is common in patients in the final stages of consumption, Violetta has a miraculous resurgence of energy. Touchingly, we hear the solo violin recall the theme of her love. We hear her repeat the phrase, "Estrano," it's strange, the words with which her great scena in Act 1 began. "In me rinasce," she cries. "I am recovering. I am well again." But the wonder and joy of the moment exhaust the last of the girl's strength, and she falls dying to the stage.
Cessarono gli spasimi del dolore. In me rinasce, rinasce, m'agita in sogno.